Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Shanti Hershenson. Shanti Hershenson is your average 17-year-old in every other way, other than the myriad of books she has penned. On most days, you can find her in her room writing her next novel, likely cuddled up with her cats. When she isn't writing, she is fangirling over whatever book she is currently reading, or freaking out over the latest enemies to lovers ship that everyone is obsessed with. She lives in Southern California with her sister, 3 cats, and parents. She is a junior in high school. And Shanti had me at 3 cats because I've been a cat person for much of my life. And by the way, if your cats are more than welcome to join the podcast at any time. So
they might come back.
Yeah, that's perfect. Cats don't usually stay in one place for any long period of time, so they like to wander and be close to where you are. But it's a pleasure having you on the podcast. I actually found Shanti through a podcast guest forum that I subscribe to, and usually weekly I will get updates from or emails from podcast guests suggesting potential guests for podcasts, and I saw your profile. I saw that you're an author, a very prolific author, and I said, I have to have you on the podcast. So here we are, and thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with me.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And now, for my older listeners, I got to ask you this question. What is, and I got to find this, an enemies to lovers ship novel or novelette, or explain that for my older listeners.
So it's a trope in books, particularly romance, that teenagers just we all read it. We all think it's great. When I was 14, I wrote this book called Never Dying. And that's actually, I think, where that bio first appeared. And my other author bio that comes up in some of my other books that I wrote when I was 12. But this is the more fun one. I was like, okay, there's going to be romance in this book, but the characters have to hate each other first. So that's where that came from.
So basically they go from hating each other to coexisting with each other or loving each other.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's fun.
So good. Now, when my Utica University students ask me what an enemies to ship novel is, at least I can begin to tell them, and I can tell them where that came from.
Yeah.
Thank you for educating me and my listeners on that. And again, it's all in line with the mantra of this podcast, is that we're all students and teachers. So let's learn from each other. So thank you for that, Shanti.
Of course.
Now, according to your Instagram profile, you're 17 years old and you've written 33 books, 20 of which have been published. So my question for you is twofold. What inspired you to begin writing? And what appealed to you about that form of creative expression as opposed to other forms of creative expression?
Of course. So I've always loved writing since I was little. When I was younger, I would create stories during class. I would scribble on pieces of paper. Sometimes these stories would involve little illustrations. I think ultimately my earliest love of writing probably came from reading. I started reading when I was pretty young, and there was magic to it for me. I started to ask, how do these books come into existence? And then from there, I started learning what an author was. And I was like, I really want to do that. I think that's really cool. And then from that, I really just kept on creating stories. I didn't think being an author was something that I could ever do. If anything, I was like, okay, maybe when I'm older and I have a nice job, then I can write a book or something and try to get it published. Ultimately, that's not how it played out. So then what happened was when I was 12 years old, I was stuck at home because of the pandemic. And as we all know, that was a time when we were really, really, really isolated. But I think also a lot of people found different creative mediums. They found different ways to cope with the fact that they were stuck at home 24/7. So for me, it was writing. I started writing this book called Biome Lock. And if I look at it now, I'm like, oh, it really makes sense that I was stuck at home and I was 12 years old when I was writing this. Because the main characters, they're 13 and they're isolated because they're prisoners from an alien invasion. But still, there's like the themes of trying to find themselves and dealing with all these things that 13-year-olds would experience. So I guess when it comes to the start of my writing career, it really was the pandemic that inspired me. The second part of the question, I really love the idea of creating a story. And I do think I also would really enjoy creating movies. But ultimately, at the base of it, it's storytelling. And I really enjoy novels. I enjoy writing novels more than I enjoy writing my short stories because it's like you get to go so deep into these characters and these universes. And I don't really get to do that so much with other creative mediums. I, for example, enjoy art. I'm a really terrible artist. I can't draw anything. But for me, I feel like I can't really go into the characters, into the illustrations as I would if I was just writing it. And it's also just like, writing's what I've always been. I don't want to say good at, because I really was not good at writing when I was a kid, even when I started out. But now it's what I'm comfortable with and also just what I love.
Yeah, when you do what you love, it isn't work.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think when you have an opportunity to write a book or a novel, there's so much more creativity that you can impose on it. You can impose different layers, you can impose different plot lines. But when you're doing shorter stories or blogs that are meant to be kind of compact, impactful, you can't do that. You have to kind of like go from point A to point B to point C in a pretty direct fashion. And considering I think that
Mhm.
most people now read a lot of online stuff on their phones, and I think the average length of time is like 3 or 4 minutes, or if that may be too long of a period of time that I'm quoting, but I could see where your creative process would be more fueled writing a novel because your imagination can kind of run wild with you, and you can go in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
So tell me about your process for writing a book from first draft to publication. How long does the process usually take for you?
Of course. So I'd say it's around a year. But in that time, I'm also writing other books too. It's kind of complicated. But to begin, I have an idea. And usually, when I have said idea, I'm probably working on another first draft or something. But once I finish a first draft, then I go and take a break from it. I don't immediately jump into the second draft. And I go and I write a new book. And while I'm writing a book, I'm always writing and editing a book at the same time. So then I always have a book that I'm working on with my editor. And that's usually the book that's going to be my next release. So, it's like I'm always just writing my first draft, I'm always just editing another book, and it depends on the book. Sometimes, like, I can do 4 drafts and be like, "Okay, I feel good about this." I've had some where it's like 6 drafts, 10 drafts, and sometimes, like, what I'll do is once I'm done with the book, and this is usually maybe immediately after, like, a week after, I'll feel like, "You know what? I'm not ready to take a break from this book yet." Like, the creative process, like, it's still going, like, I still feel that flow. So I'll get a printed version of the book, and I'll try to edit it on paper and really read it as a reader. And then from there, I'll go and I'll, like, put the edits on the page, like, on my computer. And then, maybe I'll take a break, maybe I won't. Um, and then around a year later, of course, there has to be several months for the marketing and, like, the pre-order campaigns, the book is published. Which sounds so chaotic, but I swear it makes sense.
It sounds like you have a really good process in place. It sounds like you have a plan. And one of the things in terms of listening to you on a previous podcast, it sounds like you have a very good sense of the trajectory your book is going to take, how you're going to market that, where you're going to market that. And that's something I want to get into you with a little later in terms of the marketing aspect, because that is something you appear to have found much success with. So I'm sure my listeners, both young and older, will get some value from your expertise in that area. So, um, what are the primary themes or story plots that you've explored in your writing? I've deduced that sci-fi has been a big piece for you, but I also believe you also are starting to explore other topics and themes outside of that. So, Tell our listeners about your primary genres of writing that you engage in.
Of course, so mainly I write young adult, sci-fi, and fantasy, but I've also really been trying to explore other things. And it's just like it's been a journey, but I'd say the majority of the books that I wrote, at least when I was starting out, and I mean, I have to say, literally, the book I'm writing right now is in the same genre, but I did a lot of like dystopian and like, it takes place in the future and how does the future look? How does the government look? Everything like that. And I've tried to move away from it. I have a couple other books that I've written that are completely different. I've had some contemporary books. However, the book I'm working on right now is dystopian. But really, at the core of all of my books, there are a lot of social issues and things that are prevalent to both just America, but also just things I've gone through or things I've seen happen. And then I take that and I put it in a backdrop of a completely fictional, crazy universe where people are living forever and all this crazy stuff. So at the core, there's a bit of truth to all my books. Not necessarily in that they're based on true stories, but that the things the characters are feeling or going through or seeing in the world are things that maybe I've observed.
What authors have influenced you in the sci-fi genre or other genres?
Ooh, okay. I have so many influences and just authors that I love. My all-time favorite author is Lee Bardugo. She writes fantasy. I love how she writes her characters, how the characters really are like woven into the story and their backstories, everything like that. So I think I've really looked at her books and I've been like, okay, I connect to these characters so much. How can I make my readers connect to like my characters? I'm a really big Star Wars fan, so I'd say especially early on, one of my biggest influences, and you kind of see it in my first books. There's a lot of like, there's kind of like, ooh, this kind of reminds me of Star Wars, but it's like it's not that it's like exactly, but it's like for my first like dystopian novel, like the kind of action and like the violence was a bit like it was like it kind of reminded me of like the Star Wars battles, or there's like a scene where they're like being chased and there's like a spaceship involved. So it's really like it's actually really cool to me to see how like, the things that I loved when I was younger really influenced my work.
And I'll tell you what, I was going through your website and reading some of the plot lines or the story summaries of the books you've written. It kind of reminded me, for me, my go-to person in sci-fi is Rod Serling, who did a lot of stuff with the Twilight Zone. And I was looking at your stuff with writing about dystopian novels and also some time travel, that basically where past, present, and future really kind of exists in like one continuum. That kind of reminded me of a lot of stuff that Rod Serling did with the Twilight Zone. So I was wondering, have you ever seen any of Serling's work or read any of his work? Or
Haven't I really need to. Like, I've had so many people tell me to watch it, and it's like, I have to.
I think if you do, when you feel the move to do so, when you have the time to do so, I think you're also going to see a lot of the influences of some of the other authors that you've quoted. So it wouldn't surprise me that once you kind of have an opportunity to kind of take a deep dive into his work, that you'll see some very alignment to storylines that you've come up with, and a lot of your other authors who have influenced you have as well too. So now, you published a children's book recently.
I did.
Zeke comes out of his shell. Please tell our listeners more about Zeke.
Of course. So this was sort of like a passion project of mine, more so like I've been wanting to write a children's book forever, and there was never a good time. I could never like get like a good story out. And then it started like this one night. I feel like I was like home alone, and whenever I'm home alone, I'm really bored. And I was like, I just remember I was sitting on my bed and I was like, I need to do something. Like I need to create something, which is ridiculous because I'd already written my 1,000 words for the day. I'd already finished work. So I sat down and I started writing this children's book. Zeke is one of my stuffed animals that happened to be next to me as I was writing. And I was like, oh, he would be a really good main character. So I started writing about my hermit crab. And from there, it became this story about this shy hermit crab who needs to like come out of his shell. Not literally, of course, because that's not, hermit crabs can't do that. And it was so funny because I just had a lot of fun writing it. A lot of like the story stuff, like at least the first draft was pretty ridiculous. And then from there, I found a company that could do the illustrations. And then I realized I really have to cut this book down. And I had to also, while writing it, realize that it's like some of the suspense in this book is not suitable for a middle grade book. So there was still a lot I had to learn about writing children's books, specifically in that night, where I was like, oh, so this can't happen. He can't get chased by like a crazy shark or something. That's gonna scare the kids. Um, but then by the end of that, and then a few months later, it actually turned into this pretty put together children's book that was suitable for children, unlike the first draft.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a very intuitive process for writing. It's just that when you get an idea, it kind of just comes to you and then it just goes from your head, from, right on paper.
Yeah, I don't, so yes and no. Occasionally, I'm like, "Oh, no," like, I need to actually really figure out, like, logically how this is gonna happen. But a lot of the time, like, when I just sit down and I write, it just comes out and it's just like, "Okay, like, this makes sense. Now the character's gonna do this." And it's almost like a video game where I'm just, like, controlling these characters through these situations. However, I will say with the book I'm reading right now, the scene that I had to write yesterday, I got my characters into a situation that I hadn't meant to get them in. I was like, "Okay, they're gonna have an encounter with these people, and they're gonna get out of it." And then I made it so they really can't easily get out of it. So I had to work like, "Okay, so how are they gonna do this?" Because like, we have a whole 'nother plot line coming up that needs to happen. And it was really funny because I literally, like, I texted my dad and I was like, "Help, my characters just accidentally joined a cult." But it, like, I got them out of it, and now we can move on to the next plot line until I have to return to that one because now I have this whole other thing that's, like, open-ended. Um, but it's, like, it's a lot of fun.
And it sounds like your brain goes at light speed too when you're
Oh,
coming up
yeah.
with these characters. I would suspect that if your brain was a computer, you'd have about 100 tabs open at once, going from one category to the next to try to weave a story together.
Oh, definitely. I have 100 tabs open right now just on my computer.
Yes. Wow. So you do get some sleep in between all of this, correct?
I do,
Well,
shockingly.
shockingly, I would have,
Yeah.
okay, 33 books, 20 that have been published. My first question is, boy, when do you sleep? The other question that I wanted to ask you, and this just came to me, I know a lot of young adults I talk to sometimes have difficulty balancing the different categories in their lives between school, between work, between family, between friends. Sounds like you have a lot of categories that you're juggling at once, but you also sound like you do it very well. What is your secret? What is the secret to kind of balancing all the categories in your life so you're not becoming too scattered or too overwhelmed?
At the end of the day, it's just, like, time in that, like, I've had a lot of time to figure this out. Early on, it was rough. I definitely was prioritizing my writing over my schoolwork, and I mean, in some ways I still do, but I still get it done. Early on, when I was in middle school, I was not doing my work. I would write and, ooh, if I had some time, I'd do that assignment that was due a few weeks ago. And I, didn't have so much of a social life because it's like, "Okay, I need to write." And it's like, I still don't go out as much as most people in my grade, but I still, like, I have a whole lot of friends that I hang out with, and I have a boyfriend and stuff. But really, ultimately, it's just been figuring it out. I will say that one thing has been actually going to a school that I actually really like my teachers, and I wanna do this assignment because I enjoy this class and I wanna learn more. I've also thankfully, this year, I have a free period. So I've been doing some writing during my free period, and then be after school, I'll do the homework, or if I'm really, really stressed out, I'll do my homework during the free period, and I'll do my writing after school. Because what I've realized, it's like, I'm gonna write no matter what. It's been, I've written 1,000 words a day ever since I was in, like, 7th grade. So I know I'm gonna write. So really, it's a matter of, like, squeezing in all the schoolwork. To-do lists have been very helpful. I make to-do lists, and I'm like, "Okay, I need to do all this homework, and I need to write, and I need to do these marketing things." And then one thing I've done is I've kind of sorted through it, and I've been like, "Okay, what's gonna take the least amount of time?" And I tend to do those just to get them out of the way. And then maybe I'll do, like, 30 minutes on something that's gonna take a little longer, and then do more of the little tasks. And by that, I still can get it done and have a good hour to a free time at the end of the day to just relax or, like, watch TV or hang out with my cats.
Now, what are your cats' names?
Okay. So we have Jin, who's named after the Star Wars character. She's the one who was in here earlier. She's a little menace. Then we have Apollo and Eclipse, and they were gifts for my sister and I's 13th birthday because we had a pandemic birthday. So instead of getting like a party, we got to go pick out a kid. They are the sweetest cat family. They come up in some of my books too.
Yeah, I think cats are great. Like, we don't have any cats currently, but they fit my wife's and I lifestyle because, they're just independent. And they teach us a lot about humanity, more so than some humans do, Shanti.
Yeah.
Now, just getting back for a minute to your children's book, Z Comes Out of His Shell. What age group is that appropriate for? Did you target? You know,
So I'd say it's anywhere from preschool to early elementary school. It's one of those books that I imagine can be sort of flexible.
Mhm.
I think when I've done my guest speaking at schools, I tend to speak to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade. And then once we reach fourth grade, it's like, okay, these kids are reading like Harry Potter and stuff. They're reading all these novels. They're not going to enjoy this as much as the younger kids who still actually find joy in picture books. So it's flexible, but definitely the younger kids, the kids who are just learning how to read. I feel like this is one of the books, though, that's maybe more that the parent would read to the kid rather than the kid reads on their own. Just because it's like the language is understandable, but it's not like a book where it's for kids who are just learning how to read, where it's like the cat walked across or the cat meowed. There's still a little more complexities in the language. That's also just mainly because I'd never written for kids before, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I write novels. I write, young adult books. I don't know how to make this comprehensible. So it's still like it's readable on their own, but it's more for like slightly more advanced readers or kids learning how to read when their parents are reading to them.
But it sounds like you've structured the book so it really can create some really good quality time between parent and child, which I think is so
Yeah.
important, particularly with families now being so spread out across the country. I think it's important that, especially when they're young, to be able to try to build in as much time together as you can. Because down the road, they'll want to establish their own independence, their own identity. And trust me, as somebody who's raised three kids, time goes by really quick.
Yeah.
And so I've learned that, and I tell my students, cherish the time that you have with each other, cherish the time that you have with your loved ones, because it goes by very quickly.
Yeah.
I caught your interview with Dr. Christopher Liu, who's the host of the Financial Freedom Podcast. And you are quite the astute marketer. And you've been able to create an extensive following on social media. I think 65,000 followers on TikTok, correct?
Yeah.
What is the secret to your success in this area?
Trial and error. You just have to try things and you have to write down what works. So it's really like just trying anything that comes to mind that you could reach people and sell books and then figuring out what has actually worked. For me, it took several book releases to realize that social media is important, but you need to reach readers in other ways too. And it's really a combination of all those things. For me, once I realized that the most important part of releasing a book is what happens before. You can't easily release a successful book if you start marketing it when the book releases or after the book releases. You have to really start ahead and you have to build up all of this like excitement for the book. And it sounds tricky, but it's really not. You just have to post consistently on social media and you have to, for me, like getting early reviewers has been really helpful. It's also a really good way to get the Amazon algorithm to start promoting your book. So basically what happens is as soon as the book is available to review, a day, it can be a couple days before the release. It really depends on when I put it up there. Um, then I have my team of advanced readers who hopefully have already reviewed it on Goodreads. And also, this can be anywhere from like 50 readers to 100. I had 300 readers for one book. And of course, it's really only a small percentage of them that actually review the books. So the numbers, like, it's really important. And then I say, like, hi guys, okay, so it's time to review the book on Amazon. And then I hopefully get a handful of reviews on release day. And then this shows Amazon that, like, okay, readers are interested and people are enjoying it. So then it'll go and it'll start promoting my book. And then after that, it's a lot of just promotion. I do these newsletter promotions where I have the book at a discounted price and then I have it be blasted out to all these readers. That's really helpful just to get the book in people's hands, get some sales, boost the rankings.
Mhm.
And then once I'd say the month of the release is over, I see like, okay, how many reviews does this book have? How many sales has it had? And then I can declare whether or not it's been going really well and I should keep marketing it or I should try to relax a little and go focus on the next book. So, for example, my book, Little Green Man, I was not expecting this book to do well by any means. I thought that this was going to be a complete fail. I wrote it when I was 14. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't think people were going to enjoy it. The first ARC review I ever got was 3 stars. And I was like, okay, this is not a good sign. And it's actually been one of my most successful books. So once that release month was over and it was still continuously getting reviews and sales, I've kept on marketing it. And I'm still marketing it as well as releasing other books too.
Well, I think any good story, I think it can be timeless. It doesn't matter if it was published last month or 3 years ago. If it's a good storyline that can kind of transcend the test of time, it's going to sell anytime.
Yeah.
But, yeah, in my experience, sometimes the things that we project are not going to turn out well or not going to be successful, end up being more successful than the things we thought were going to be successful. And it's just like kind of one of those mysteries of life, Shanti, that I've learned is as I've gotten older, I just kind of honor it and just not question it. Just, I just look at the outcome and say, okay, this is it. This is pretty cool. But again, there's a lot of times the things that we don't think are going to be successful end up being more successful beyond our wildest dreams.
Yeah.
I also read that you are an anti-bullying advocate. Can you tell us what inspired you to want to create awareness in this area?
Of course. So I've experienced bullying a lot through my life. I think I'm just like slightly different than my classmates. And that leads to people not being so nice to me. And I had some, really intense, really disturbing, really upsetting experiences in school. And I've used that to try to spread awareness and be like, hey, school doesn't have to be like this.
Mm.
And for me, a lot of my awareness has been through writing. I've included these like themes in my books. I wrote a whole novel told in poetry about it. I have a companion poetry collection about it. And really, it's like, just trying to like let people know, like, there are things we can do to not have this happen and to not have our like youth be so, distraught going to school.
So, and, I think people who are perceived as different, we're still a society that fears different, that
Yeah.
we would prefer the status quo. And for me, I like different. I like individuals who are kind of the outliers, the trendsetters, individuals that kind of think creatively, that think differently, that have a different sense of the world. And when you wear your beliefs out on your sleeve, and when you tell individuals, this is who I genuinely am, and it's different from what the status quo is, you become automatically a target for everybody. What I like is that what it seems that you've learned to develop resilience at a very young age. You've channeled that into your writing, and you've channeled that into to a message. And what is the message that you give other young adults who are victims of microaggressions, victims of bullying? What is the message that you give to them?
I try to tell them, like, you're not alone. It's just like you're not alone. And I think when people start to believe that they're alone, that's when it sort of becomes a lot worse. It's where it becomes a lot harder to handle. So just letting people know you're not alone in this. There are other people who've experienced bullying, and those other people feel alone too. And then also like trying to let people know, like, there are things you can do about it. You're not helpless in your situation. And really, I think if I realized that a lot sooner, then it would have really helped me.
Well, the fact is that you've come to that realization. You've been able to transcend those challenges, and it's transcended into greater resilience for you and probably some really, really creative and impactful writing.
Yeah.
So continue to do what you are doing, and it's obviously making a difference. And, that's what it's about, that the tracks that we leave in this world are what we're going to be remembered by when we leave this world. So
Yeah.
keep making those impactful tracks, Shanti.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If there is one thing you want to leave our listeners with today, and then one thing with subcategories, I'm also very good with that. What would that be?
Okay. So my biggest message is always like, if you want to write, go write. And also if you like writing, you're a writer. There's nothing you can do to become a writer other than enjoy it. If you find that this is one of your passions, congratulations, you're a writer. And from there, you're never too young or too old to write a book. I hear from teenagers, even like, people in middle school and even elementary schoolers, like, oh, I want to write a book, but I'm too young to do it. That's what I thought. And I was very, very wrong. So, if you can put words on paper and you have the time, and even though it doesn't seem like it, you probably do, you can
Mhm.
write a book. And on the contrary, you're never too old to write a book. I hear a lot of people who are maybe a little older and they're like, oh, well, I missed my time to write a book. No, you didn't. You know, you got this. Like, even if you can only put a few words on paper every day, or, maybe you can only write like 100 words a week, you got this. If you want to do it, you can do it.
And I'm a firm believer you're never too young to make a difference and you're never too old to make a difference.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're obviously walking proof of that with being a prolific writer, an anti-bullying advocate, somebody who's going to be a bright light in this world for many years to come. And I'm a firm believer that the younger generation, you're the future. And, if we have more individuals like you who are willing to go out there and make a difference and leave a positive mark on the world's going to be a better place, Shanti.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And my last question, if individuals want to get in touch with you, want to follow you, want to find out more about your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Of course. So you can first find me on my website, which is shantihershenson.com. That's ShantiHershenson.com. You can also find me on Instagram, which is just at Shanti Hershenson, and on TikTok, which is at Shanti Who Writes. And if you look me up, I'm in other places. So just, don't hesitate to look. And my books are available everywhere you can buy books online and in some select bookstores.
Trust me, you Google Shanti's name, you'll find her. She's not hard to find on the internet. So, Shanti, thank you so much for spending time with me and sharing space on the Teaching Journeys podcast. I enjoyed our conversation immensely. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And with that, that is a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.